She was just a black cleaning lady, or so the bride thought. In front of hundreds of guests, the bride mocked, humiliated, and even called the police to have her removed. What no one knew, that guest was the billionaire CEO who owned the mansion they were standing in. And when the truth came out, the bride turned pale, the groom was speechless, and the entire wedding party would never forget what happened next. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The sun was a painter, spreading streaks of orange and gold across the evening sky. It cast a warm, forgiving light on the sprawling Carterwood estate, a place that seemed carved from a dream. Marble steps, smooth and cool, led up to a grand entrance. And from within the ballroom, the light of 1,000 crystal teardrops on a massive chandelier spilled onto the manicured lawns. The air was filled with the gentle clinking of champagne glasses and the low, happy murmur of conversations. This was a wedding designed to be an event, a declaration of status and success. At the center of it all was Sabrina Whitmore, the bride. She stood in a gown that had cost more than most people's cars, a cascade of white silk and intricate beading that shimmered with every small movement. Her smile was wide and practiced, a perfect accessory to the diamond necklace that sparkled at her throat. She basked in the attention, turning this way and that, allowing her guests to admire her, to drink in the spectacle she had so carefully orchestrated. Every detail, from the ice sculptures melting slowly on the buffet tables to the string quartet playing softly in the corner, was a testament to her vision. She was the queen of this perfect, expensive world. But then, her perfect smile faltered. Her eyes, scanning the crowd of fawning admirers, landed on a figure standing near the grand entrance. It was a woman, a black woman, dressed in a simple, almost plain blue dress. She wasn't holding a glass of champagne. She wasn't engaged in conversation. She was just watching, observing the festivities with a quiet, unreadable expression. To Sabrina, she was a stain on a perfect canvas, a note played out of tune. A ripple of whispers started near Sabrina and spread outwards. "Who is that?" one guest murmured to another. "Is she with the catering staff?" another asked, a touch of disdain in their voice. Sabrina's face tightened. The good humor of the evening evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp irritation. This was her day, her kingdom, and this woman, this interloper, did not belong. Without a word to her new husband, Ethan, who was smiling placidly beside her, Sabrina began to move. She cut through the crowd, her expensive dress rustling with purpose. Each step was deliberate, a queen marching to deal with a peasant who had wandered into the throne room. The guests parted for her, their conversations hushing as they sensed the impending drama. She stopped directly in front of the woman. Her voice was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, and it dripped with condescension. "Excuse me," she began, her eyes raking over the simple blue dress with contempt. "The cleaning staff should use the back entrance. You're making the guests uncomfortable." The woman in the blue dress did not flinch. She simply met Sabrina's glare with a calm, polite smile. She said nothing, her silence a stark contrast to Sabrina's loud aggression. This quiet dignity seemed to enrage Sabrina even more. The bride felt her authority being challenged, not by words, but by a simple, unshakable composure. "Did you hear me?" Sabrina snapped, her voice rising. "What are you even doing here? Did you think you could just wander in and grab a free meal?" She gestured dismissively at the woman's dress. "You clearly can't afford to be here. You're crashing our wedding, aren't you?" The woman, whose name was Naomi Carter, still did not raise her voice. She simply said softly, "I believe I have a right to be here." This gentle response was like fuel on a fire. Sabrina laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed across the lawn. "A right to be here? That's hilarious. She turned to the nearest member of the event staff, a young man holding a tray of appetizers. You, get her out of here. Escort this person off the property immediately. The young man looked flustered. He glanced from the furious bride to the calm woman and back again, unsure of what to do. Naomi gave a slight shake of her head, a silent signal for him to stay put. I'm afraid I won't be leaving, Naomi said, her tone still even and polite. That was the final straw. Sabrina's face contorted with fury. This was an unacceptable defiance. In front of her guests on her wedding day, she was being ignored by someone she considered to be nothing more than a servant. Oh, you'll be leaving, Sabrina sneered. She pulled her phone from the small, beaded purse clutched in her hand. Her fingers flew across the screen. I'm calling the police. We'll see how brave you are when you're being arrested for trespassing. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was more than just a minor scene. It was escalating into a full-blown incident. Some guests looked away, a faint blush of shame on their cheeks. Others shuffled their feet, suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. A few, however, watched with hungry eyes, a nervous chuckle escaping their lips. They were eager for the show. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still. She watched as Sabrina spoke into the phone, her voice filled with fabricated panic and outrage, telling the dispatcher about a trespasser who was threatening the security of her event. Naomi's expression remained serene, her posture radiating a profound sense of peace. As Sabrina hung up the phone, a triumphant smirk spread across her face. She looked at Naomi as if she were a bug she was about to squash. In her mind, she had already won. She had restored order to her perfect day. The minutes ticked by in a heavy, awkward silence. The string quartet had faltered, their music dying out in the tense atmosphere. Guests stood in frozen clusters, their champagne glasses untouched. All eyes were on the grand entrance, waiting. Then, in the distance, the first flash of red and blue lights cut through the twilight. The siren grew louder, a wail that announced the arrival of the law. A police car crunched up the gravel driveway and came to a stop. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out. He was in his early 40s, with a calm, professional demeanor. His name was Officer Mark Daniels, and his eyes quickly scanned the scene, taking in the opulent setting, the crowd of well-dressed guests, and the two women at the center of the tension. I received a call about a disturbance, he said, his voice steady and authoritative. Who called it in? Sabrina's hands shot up as if she were a star pupil in a classroom. She rushed forward, her voice a torrent of dramatic indignation. I did, officer. Thank you for coming so quickly. That woman, she said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Naomi, is trespassing. She snuck into my private wedding. I asked her to leave and she refused. She needs to be removed immediately. The crowd murmured its agreement, a wave of support for the bride. Officer Daniels listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He gave Sabrina a short nod and then turned his full attention to the woman in the blue dress. He walked towards her, his steps measured and deliberate. He didn't approach her like a criminal. He approached her with a quiet respect that seemed to puzzle the onlookers. Ma'am, he said, his voice much softer than it had been with Sabrina. Can you please tell me your name? Of course, officer, the woman replied, her voice as calm as a still lake. My name is Dr. Naomi Carter. A loud, mocking laugh erupted from Sabrina. Doctor? Oh, that's rich. A doctor of what? Mopping floors? Don't fall for it, officer. She's a nobody. A few guests snickered along with her, emboldened by the bride's confidence. But Officer Daniels wasn't looking at Sabrina. He was looking at Naomi, and his expression had changed completely. A flicker of recognition, of shock, passed through his eyes. The name... Carter. It was a name everyone in this town knew, though few had ever seen the person it belonged to. He froze. A chilling stillness fell over him. The professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. He cleared his throat. Excuse me for one moment, he said, his voice suddenly tight. He stepped away from the two women and pulled out a small tablet from his belt. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, tapping and swiping. The guests watched, confused. What was he checking? After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, he looked up. The color had drained from his face. He put the tablet away and walked back towards Naomi, his posture now ramrod straight. The tone of his voice had shifted entirely. It was now filled with a deep, profound respect. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Naomi directly, "do you have any identification on you?" Naomi nodded. She reached into a small, simple purse she carried and pulled out a sleek, black card. It wasn't a driver's license or a credit card. It was minimalist and elegant, with just a name and a corporate logo embossed in silver. She handed it to him. Sabrina scoffed again, unable to help herself. "Whatever fake card she cooked up—" "Ma'am." Officer Daniels cut her off, his voice sharp as broken glass. He didn't even look at her. He turned to face Sabrina, holding the black card in his hand like it was a royal decree. His voice was firm and loud, carrying across the silent lawn for every single guest to hear. "Ma'am," he said, locking eyes with the stunned bride, "this woman owns this property. You are a guest in her home." The world seemed to stop. The light breeze died. The chirping of the crickets ceased. A profound, echoing silence fell over the lawn. Sabrina's triumphant smile collapsed as if it had been struck by a hammer. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The carefully constructed world she had built for this one perfect day shattered into a million pieces around her. Jaws dropped. All across the manicured grounds, guests stared, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and dawning comprehension. Ethan, the groom, who had been standing silently by, looked as if he had been punched in the gut. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked from the police officer to the woman in the blue dress, and then to his new wife, whose arrogance had just led them into a catastrophe. Through it all, Dr. Naomi Carter remained quiet. Her dignity was a shield, completely unshaken by the chaos erupting around her. She simply took her card back from the officer, gave him a small, grateful nod, and watched as the truth settled over the crowd like a heavy shroud. Sabrina stammered, her mind racing, desperately trying to find a way to deny what she was hearing, to rewrite the reality that was crashing down upon her. But there was no escape. The cleaning lady was the queen. 2 days earlier, the sun had been just as beautiful, but the grounds of Carterwood Estate had been quiet. Dr. Naomi Carter walked along a stone path, her simple walking shoes making a soft sound on the gravel. Beside her was Robert Kane, a man everyone called Bobby. He was in his mid-50s with a kind face and eyes that held a fierce loyalty. He was more than her estate manager. He was her oldest friend and confidant. "Are you sure about this, Naomi?" Bobby asked, his voice laced with concern. "Letting them rent the estate is one thing, but attending the wedding yourself, incognito, it seems risky." Naomi smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "It's the only way, Bobby. I leased this place as a favor to an old college friend of Ethan's father. But I'm curious. I want to see how these people behave when they don't know who's watching. I want to see how they treat the staff, the vendors, the people they believe are invisible." They stopped by a magnificent old oak tree, its branches spreading wide like welcoming arms. Naomi placed a hand on its rough bark. This estate was her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of a life she had built from nothing. Her past was a story of impossible odds. She had once been a janitor, working nights to support herself and her young son. She was a single mother with a brilliant mind, scrubbing floors in a university science lab while dreaming of the discoveries she could make if only given the chance. She had saved every penny, studied every moment she could, and eventually, through sheer force of will and a genius for biotechnology, she had founded Carter Biotech. It started in her garage and grew into a global empire, a company that saved lives and changed the world. She was now a billionaire, a philanthropist, a name spoken with reverence in boardrooms and laboratories across the globe. But she had never forgotten the feeling of being invisible, of being judged by the uniform she wore instead of the person she was. "You see who people truly are when they think you're powerless," she said softly, her gaze distant. "When they think you don't matter. That's when their true character comes out. Is it kindness or is it cruelty? I've seen both, Bobby. I just want to see which one shows up to this party." Bobby nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He had known her since the days she was struggling, and he knew the deep well of empathy that drove her. This wasn't about spying. It was about understanding. It was a social experiment, conducted by a woman who had seen the best and worst of humanity from every possible angle. She wanted to believe in the good, but she was wise enough to prepare for the bad. Back in the present, the wedding party was in chaos. The buzzing of whispers was now a deafening roar. People were talking all at once, their faces a mix of embarrassment and morbid excitement. Sabrina, her face pale and splotchy, was trying desperately to regain control. "It's just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice high and strained. She forced a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "A silly, silly mistake. We can all have a good laugh about this later." But no one was laughing. They were all staring at Dr. Naomi Carter, the woman they had just watched Sabrina humiliate. Naomi, however, seemed to have no interest in the drama. She gave a polite nod to Officer Daniels, and then, without a single glance at the mortified bride and groom, she turned and walked towards the grand doors of the mansion. She moved with an unhurried grace, ignoring the dozens of eyes that followed her every step. She was no longer an outsider. She was the owner of the house, and she was simply walking inside. A young woman broke away from the cluster of event staff and hurried after her. It was Lily Moreno, the junior wedding planner. She was barely 24, and her face was wet with tears. She caught up with Naomi just inside the magnificent foyer. "Dr. Carter," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Dr. Carter, I am so sorry. I saw what she was doing. I should have stepped in. I should have said something. I was afraid of losing my job." Naomi stopped and turned to face the young planner. She looked at Lily with a surprising warmth and kindness. There was no anger in her eyes, only understanding. "It's all right, Lily," she said, her voice gentle. "You don't need to blame yourself. Fear can make people hesitate. What's important is what you do after the fear passes." She reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Lily's arm. "Thank you for your kindness. It did not go unnoticed." With that, Naomi continued down the hallway, leaving Lily standing in the foyer, a mix of relief and awe washing over her. Naomi found a private lounge, a quiet, wood-paneled room filled with comfortable leather chairs and shelves of old books. She sat down, not in a state of anger or agitation, but with the same calm she had displayed all evening. She poured herself a cup of tea from a silver service that was always kept ready. Then she took out her phone. It was the same simple, elegant phone, but the call she made now was not to the police. It was to her chief legal counsel. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft and controlled, but held the unshakable weight of absolute authority. "David," she said, sipping her tea, "I need you to prepare the ownership and event contract papers for Carterwood Estate, and I need you to freeze the event account for the Whitmore wedding, effective immediately." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Naomi listened, her expression unchanging. No need for explanations yet," she continued. "Just execute it. We'll discuss the details in the morning." She ended the call and placed the phone down on the polished wood table beside her. A trap had been sprung, not with malice, but with a quiet, decisive click. The first consequence had been delivered. The reckoning had begun. Lily Moreno couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, the events of the evening replaying in her mind like a movie on a loop. She saw Sabrina's cruel, twisted face, heard her mocking words. She saw Dr. Carter's incredible poise, her unshakable dignity in the face of such ugliness. And she saw herself, standing by, silent and afraid. The shame was a heavy weight in her chest. Dr. Carter had been kind to her, had understood her fear. But Lily couldn't forgive herself so easily. She had been a bystander. She had let her fear of losing a job she didn't even particularly like, stop her from doing what was right. Sabrina's cruelty disgusted her. It wasn't just a bride being difficult. It was a person enjoying the act of belittling someone she thought was helpless. It was a sickness, and Lily had watched it happen without a word of protest. Should she have spoken up? Yes, absolutely. Should she risk her career now to stand with the woman who had been so wronged? The question echoed in her mind. Her boss was a friend of the Whitmore family. Speaking out would almost certainly get her fired. She would be blacklisted in the small, insular world of event planning in their city. It would be a professional disaster. But then she thought of Dr. Carter's face again. That calm strength, the quiet words of reassurance in the foyer. What's important is what you do after the fear passes. The fear was passing now, being replaced by a hot, determined anger. Her job wasn't worth her integrity. Her silence wasn't worth the price of her self-respect. As the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Lily made a decision. She sat up, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and resolve. She picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled as she found the contact information for Carterwood Estate and sent a message to the general inquiry address, hoping it would find its way to Dr. Carter. "Dr. Carter," she typed, "this is Lily Moreno, the junior planner. What I witnessed last night was unacceptable. I am willing to provide a formal statement about everything Sabrina Whitmore said and did. I want to help in any way I can." She hesitated for a moment, then added one more thing. During the confrontation, instinctively, she had pulled out her own phone and, shielded by the crowd, had started recording. The audio was crystal clear. Sabrina's sneering voice, the gasps of the crowd. Everything. "I also have an audio recording of the entire incident," she wrote. "Please let me know if it would be useful." She hit send before she could lose her nerve. For a moment, she felt a surge of panic. What had she just done? But it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of rightness. She had chosen a side. She didn't have to wait long for a reply. Less than an hour later, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Lily, this is Naomi Carter. Thank you for your courage. It means more than you know. Your recording will be very helpful, and please do not worry about your job. Good people always find a way to rise." Reading those words, Lily felt tears well up in her eyes again. But this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of relief and gratitude. She had done the right thing, and she was no longer alone. Meanwhile, back in the bridal suite of a luxury hotel downtown, Sabrina Whitmore was holding court. The humiliation of the previous evening had, in her mind, been transformed into a story of victimhood and righteous indignation. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, a coterie of women who mirrored her own values. "Can you believe the nerve of that woman?" Sabrina said, sipping a mimosa. "She set me up. It was a test, and a completely unfair one. She was just a cleaning lady who got lucky and bought a big house. It doesn't mean she has any class." Her friends nodded in fervent agreement. "Totally," one said. "She tricked you, Sabrina." "It was entrapment," Sabrina preened, bolstered by their support. "Exactly. And who wears a dress like that to a wedding at their own house? It's just bizarre. Money can't buy taste, that's for sure." She took a long, self-satisfied sip of her drink. The narrative in her head was clear. She was the wronged party, the sophisticated bride ambushed by a tacky nouveau riche owner who didn't understand the delicate social rules that governed their world. Her new husband, Ethan, sat on the edge of the bed looking pale and uneasy. He had been quiet ever since they had fled the estate in a storm of embarrassment. "Sabrina, maybe you should just let it go," he ventured timidly. You did call the police on her, in her own home. Sabrina turned on him, her eyes flashing with anger. Don't you dare take her side, Ethan. I did what anyone would have done. She looked like she didn't belong. And besides, she added, her voice taking on a smug, dismissive tone, it doesn't matter. Your new tech deal is about to close. We're going to be millionaires. Who cares about some bitter old woman in a mansion? Ethan winced, but said nothing more. He knew arguing was pointless. He watched as Sabrina picked up her phone and started barking orders at wedding vendors, demanding to know the status of photo deliveries and gift registries. She was rude and insulting to a florist who had a question about the final invoice, and she openly mocked the baker's accent. She was the queen of her ballroom once more, a petty tyrant ruling over a shrinking kingdom. What Sabrina didn't know was that with every cruel word, every dismissive comment, she was digging her own grave a little deeper. Unseen, unheard, the consequences of her actions were gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, ready to break. Late that night, long after the city had gone to sleep, Naomi Carter sat in the library of her estate. The house was silent, wrapped in a peaceful darkness. Bobby had brought her a final cup of tea for the evening and was now quietly making sure all the doors were locked. Naomi looked out the large window at the moonlit grounds, the scene of the previous evening's ugliness. She felt no anger, only a profound sense of disappointment. She had hoped for better. She had hoped to witness a simple, happy celebration. Instead, she had been given a front-row seat to the casual cruelty that people inflict when they feel superior. She had seen it 1,000 times in her life, in the way a professor would dismiss her questions when she was a student, the way bankers would smirk when she, a young black woman, asked for a business loan, the way people would clutch their purses a little tighter when she walked by in her old janitor's uniform. But disappointment did not lead to inaction. It led to purpose. She picked up her phone and made one more call. It wasn't to a lawyer this time. It wasn't to her security team. It was to the chairman of her board of directors, a man she trusted implicitly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decision already made. Arthur, she said, I need you to schedule a meeting, an emergency board and stakeholder meeting, for tomorrow morning, here at the estate. There was a pause. Here? Arthur's voice was surprised. At Carterwood? Yes, Naomi confirmed. In the main ballroom. I want you to invite the entire executive team. And our primary legal counsel. I also need you to extend a formal invitation to a Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Whitmore. Tell them it's a mandatory property review concerning their event contract. Make it sound official and unavoidable. She took a sip of her tea. And one more thing. I need you to personally reach out to 2 other guests. An Officer Mark Daniels of the City Police Department, and a Miss Lily Moreno, a junior event planner. Ensure they are both present. Tell them their attendance is crucial. Bobby, who had returned to the room, stood silently by the door, listening. He saw the look in Naomi's eyes, not of vengeance, but of justice. It was the same look she got before a major business acquisition. A look of calm, calculated, and unstoppable force. Understood, Naomi, Arthur said on the other end of the line. Consider it done. Naomi ended the call. The stage was now fully set. All the players were being called to their places for the final act. Tomorrow, in the very room where Sabrina had believed she was queen, the true power structure of the world would be revealed. The next morning, a crisp, formal email landed in Ethan Whitmore's inbox. The subject line read, Mandatory Property Review Meeting, Carterwood Estate. He read it with a sinking feeling in his stomach. The email was from the corporate office of Carterwood Holdings and requested the presence of both Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore at 10 o'clock sharp in the main ballroom to discuss final billing and contractual obligations related to their event. Sabrina, we have to go back to the mansion, he said, holding out his phone for her to see. Sabrina, who was busy trying on a new designer dress she'd had delivered, barely glanced at it. She was already planning their honeymoon, a lavish trip to the Maldives designed to be photographed and posted for maximum envy. A meeting? How boring. Can't you just handle it? It's probably just about the final payment. Just pay them whatever they want so we can be done with this mess. It says it's mandatory for both of us, Ethan insisted, his voice tight with anxiety. He had a very bad feeling about this. Sabrina, please. After what happened, we need to be polite. We need to be apologetic. Sabrina finally turned to look at him, an expression of pure annoyance on her face. She scoffed. Apologetic? For what? For their owner acting like a crazy person? Honestly, Ethan, grow a spine. They should be grateful we brought some class to that dump. Fine, she sighed dramatically. I'll go, but I'm not apologizing for anything. She put on a pair of oversized designer sunglasses, a shield of arrogance. As they drove back to the estate, Ethan tried to coach her. Just let me do the talking. Be quiet, be respectful. We don't know who we're dealing with. Sabrina just laughed. Oh, please. I know exactly who we're dealing with. A bitter woman who has a big house and a big chip on her shoulder. Don't worry, darling. I know how to handle people like her. When they arrived at Carterwood Estate, the morning sun glinted off the marble columns. It looked just as grand and imposing as it had 2 days before. But this time, as they walked up the steps, there was no music, no laughter, no champagne. The air was still and heavy with anticipation. Bobby Kane met them at the door, his face a polite, unreadable mask. He didn't greet them warmly. He simply nodded. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. They're waiting for you in the ballroom. Sabrina strode past him without a word, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. Ethan gave Bobby a nervous, apologetic glance before hurrying after his wife. He felt like he was walking to his own execution. They pushed open the grand double doors to the ballroom, and they stopped dead in their tracks. The room was not empty. It was not set up for a simple billing meeting. In the center of the vast space, a long, polished mahogany table had been set up. Seated around it were a dozen people, all dressed in immaculate business attire. They were men and women with sharp, intelligent faces, people who exuded an aura of power and influence. Ethan recognized a few of them from the city's business journals. They were executives, lawyers, titans of industry. And sitting among them were 2 other familiar faces. At one end of the table sat Officer Mark Daniels, his police uniform looking stark and official in the corporate setting. And near him sat Lily Moreno, the young wedding planner who looked nervous but resolute. Confused murmurs rippled through the gathered executives as the Whitmores entered. All eyes turned to them. Sabrina's confident stride faltered. The smirk on her face dissolved, replaced by a look of utter confusion. This was not what she had expected. This was not a meeting about an invoice. This felt different. This felt serious. What's going on? She asked, her voice suddenly small. The oversized sunglasses suddenly seemed ridiculous. Bobby Kane, who had followed them in, spoke from behind them. His voice was calm and steady, but it carried an undeniable authority. Please take a seat, he said, gesturing to 2 empty chairs at the far end of the table, isolated from the rest. The owner will arrive shortly. Sabrina and Ethan walked to the chairs like they were in a trance. They sat down, the silence in the room pressing in on them from all sides. The powerful people at the table watched them, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and cool judgment. Sabrina felt a prickle of fear, a cold dread that began to seep through her carefully constructed armor of arrogance. She was no longer in control. She was no longer the queen. In this room, she was nothing. A hush fell over the room as the grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened once more. Every head turned. Every eye was fixed on the entrance. Dr. Naomi Carter entered. But this was not the woman in the simple blue dress. This was not the quiet observer who had stood by the entrance. This Naomi Carter was transformed. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit her perfectly, a statement of power and precision. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she moved with a confidence that commanded the entire space. She didn't walk, she glided. She was not just the owner of a house. She was the master of an empire, and every person in that room felt it in their bones. As she entered, everyone around the table rose to their feet. They did it instinctively, a spontaneous show of respect for the woman who was clearly the center of gravity in this universe. All except for Sabrina and Ethan, who remained frozen in their seats, staring. Sabrina turned pale. The color drained from her face, leaving it a sickly, chalky white. Her breath hitched in her throat. The woman she had dismissed, mocked, and tried to have arrested was standing before her, radiating an authority so immense it was suffocating. Naomi walked to the head of the table and remained standing. Her eyes, calm and piercing, swept across the room before landing on the Whitmores. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and strong, filling the silent ballroom. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Dr. Naomi Carter. I am the owner of Carterwood Estate, and I am the CEO of Carter Biotech." She paused, letting the weight of her title settle in the air. Ethan's face was ashen. He looked like he might be sick. Sabrina was trembling, her hands clutching the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. Naomi nodded toward Lily Moreno. "Miss Moreno, if you would." Lily, looking nervous but determined, connected her phone to the room's speaker system. A moment later, a voice filled the air. It was Sabrina's voice, sharp, cruel, and dripping with disdain. "Excuse me. The cleaning staff should use the back entrance." The recording played on. Every sneering comment, every mocking laugh, every condescending word echoed through the vast, silent room. The executives listened with grim expressions. Officer Daniels stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Lily kept her eyes on Naomi, drawing strength from her composure. "Did you think you could just wander in and grab a free meal?" the recorded voice sneered. And then the final, damning words. "I'm calling the police. We'll see how brave you are when you're being arrested for trespassing." When the recording finished, the silence that followed was deafening. Naomi let it hang in the air for a long moment before she spoke again. Her voice was not angry. It was cold, precise, and utterly devastating. 2 nights ago, at her wedding, Mrs. Whitmore encountered a guest she did not recognize, Naomi began, recounting the events with chilling detail. She saw a black woman in a simple dress and made an assumption. She assumed I was staff. She assumed I was poor. She assumed I was powerless. And based on those assumptions, she chose to humiliate me. Sabrina finally found her voice. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding," she cried out, her voice cracking. "I didn't know who you were." Naomi silenced her with a single sharp raise of her hand. The gesture was so commanding that Sabrina's words died in her throat. "That is the entire point, Mrs. Whitmore," Naomi said, her eyes locking onto Sabrina's. "You didn't know who I was, and so you showed me exactly who you are. You saw a black woman, and you assumed she was beneath you. You saw a simple dress, and you assumed it meant I had no value. You stood on property that my work paid for, in a ballroom that my company built, and you decided that I did not belong. You called the police on the owner of this estate." The room was absolutely still. No one moved. No one breathed. Ethan had his face in his hands, unable to watch. Sabrina sat exposed, stripped of all her pride, all her arrogance, all her excuses. There was nowhere left for her to hide. Naomi's gaze did not waver. She was no longer just a wronged host. She was a judge delivering a verdict. "There are consequences for such actions," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "Today, you will learn what they are." She turned her attention to the lawyers seated at the table. "Effective immediately," she announced, her voice ringing with finality. "The event contract with Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore is terminated for gross violation of the property's code of conduct, a code that explicitly forbids harassment of any guest or staff member." A quiet murmur of approval went through the room. Naomi wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Sabrina and Ethan Whitmore are hereby banned for life from this property and any other property owned or operated by Carterwood Holdings." Sabrina let out a small, choked sob. This was a social death sentence. Arterwood Estate was the premier venue in the region. To be banned from it was a mark of ultimate shame. And as for the final payment, Naomi continued, her eyes now glinting with a cold, hard light. As of last night, I had our financial department freeze the event account. The contract clearly states that in the case of a termination due to breach of contract, all payments are forfeit. There will be no refunds. At this, a few of the vendors who had been invited to attend and were standing by the walls let out quiet, relieved applause. They had all been mistreated by Sabrina, and this was their justice. Naomi then turned her warm, appraising gaze to Lily Moreno. The young planner sat up straighter, her heart pounding. "Miss Moreno," Naomi said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time. "Your integrity in a difficult situation was remarkable. Courage and character are qualities we value highly at my company. For your courage, I would like to formally offer you a full-time position as the lead event director for Carterwood Estate, with a salary that reflects your new responsibilities." Lily gasped. Tears sprang to her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, overwhelming joy. She could only nod, unable to speak, as a new life, a new future, opened up before her. Naomi then looked to Officer Daniels. "Officer," she said with sincere gratitude, "your professionalism and your commitment to finding the truth, rather than just accepting the word of the person who yelled the loudest, was a credit to your uniform. Thank you." Officer Daniels nodded curtly, a look of deep respect on his face. "You showed incredible restraint, Dr. Carter. It was an honor to assist." With all other business concluded, Naomi's attention returned, one last time, to the broken couple at the end of the table. Sabrina had completely dissolved into tears. Her face was a mess of running mascara and raw humiliation. This was a public shaming more complete and devastating than anything she could have ever imagined. She was ruined. Ethan finally looked up, his face filled with shame and regret. He stood up, his legs shaking. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice hoarse, "there is nothing I can say. I am so sorry. I should have stopped her. I'm just sorry." Naomi looked at him, not with pity, but with a stern, appraising gaze. "Regret is easy in a room full of consequences, Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly. "The real test is what you do when no one is watching. Learn from this." She then turned, and with a final decisive nod to her board of directors, she walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of Sabrina's world behind her. Weeks later, Carterwood Estate was once again filled with music and light. But this time it was not for a wedding. It was for a charity gala, an event raising money for scholarships for underprivileged students in science and technology. The guest of honor, the woman being celebrated for her immense contributions to the community and the world, was Dr. Naomi Carter. She moved through the crowd, not in a simple blue dress, but in a stunning evening gown, shaking hands and accepting accolades with her characteristic grace. And at the helm of the event, clipboard in hand, a confident smile on her face, was Lily Moreno. She was no longer a nervous junior planner, but the estate's new lead director, orchestrating the flawless evening with skill and poise. She had risen, just as Naomi had promised she would. As for Sabrina and Ethan, their story had become a local cautionary tale, a whispered legend among the city's elite about the bride who called the police on her own host. Their fall from grace was as swift as it was complete. Ethan's tech deal fell through when word of the incident reached his potential partners, who didn't want to be associated with that kind of scandal. Their marriage, built on a foundation of status and image, crumbled under the weight of their public disgrace. The night of the gala, as Naomi stood on the terrace, looking out at the beautiful estate she had built, She reflected on the events that had transpired. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. Respect is not about wealth or status. It's not about the clothes you wear or the house you live in. It's about character. It's about how you treat people, especially those you believe have nothing to offer you. The person you mock as a janitor may be the billionaire owner of the room you stand in, and those who judge by color or class, those who wield their small power with cruelty, will always, in the end, find themselves judged in return. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.